Hey guys, how's it going? My name is Dale. Welcome back to this channel. In the previous lessons, I just showed you how to create these backtext functions that allow us to retrieve data in a particular date in the past 2 years for backtexting our strategies. And with the use of these anime functions, it does not only help us look through the entire data set for the past 2 years, but it also allows us to visualize the result so that later on we can also save the intraday chart and further studies with the strategies that we deployed. Apart from these animates and also the backtext function, I also showed you how to build this main plot to create the main charts functions, and which contains the candlestick charts, the moving average, the Bollinger Bands, and also the buy-sell signals. And we just covered the candlestick chart in the last lessons. So for these lessons, we will build the moving average part and also the Bollinger part. So let's go ahead and get started. We remember that for this main plot chart, we indeed have 6 parameters, arguments that allow us to work with the candlestick charts, the moving average, the Bollinger Bands, and also the moving strategies. That's right, the moving average strategies at this point. And we just, it provides the data in a particular date, and then the main chart plot, and also the date of that particular date. And then we have the show MAs equals to true, show BB equals to true by default. And these are 2 functions or 2 arguments that allow us to enable the functions of the moving average and also the functions of the Bollinger Bands. And so let's build the moving average first. So if show MAs equals to true, so we are going to show the moving average plot. In that case, first thing first, we need to calculate the moving average. And we will use the panda functions that will use the closing price for that particular minute, and then using the rolling methods and mean methods to get the moving average. And 5 here means that we take 5 steps. That means we take 5 minutes. In that case, this is a 5 minutes moving average. And then we just assign it to the MA5. Similarly, I will do it for say MA10 and MA20, MA10 and MA20. Now we have this value. What I want to do is to just plot these 3 lines, and using the plot, which is a line plot. And the first things that we need to put is the data. And that is the data, and also the data. That is the first argument. And then the second argument is the color. And then let me show you the rest. And the second is the color, and then the line style, the line width, and then I also give it labels to it so that later on we can show it on the legend. Now for this, I will just use the orange color. For this one, this is a 10 minutes moving average. And finally, this one, I will just give it a blue color, and the line style same for the line width, but the label is 20 minutes. We indeed go through the details before in the Python for Finance part 4a and 4b, so please feel free to get back to the lessons for further informations. And now, once we have the moving average, I want to create the legends. So for this part, I would like to create a legend for this, and that the locations will be on the upper left corner, and the face color is like a dark color and font size is 10. But I also want to change the colors of the font. So I will just get the legends object. There are two methods that allows me to change the color. One is to use this is to create a for loop and then set a test color for each of the text in the legends. So I just want so for this we just get out the text from these legends with the .get text methods, and then use these .set colors to set the text colors. On the other hand, I can also use another functions that is called setP, that will help us to change all the color like by batch. So in that case, I do not need these for loop. Excellent. We just set up the moving average. The next things that I want to do is to raise the Bollinger Bands also in this main chart. For Bollinger Bands, there are two ways that we can do it. The first way is to create a functions for that. And the second way is much more easy, which is just simply use these pandas TA functions to help us to do that, and which is much more easier for us to do that. But I will show you both ways. Before we dive into the code, I just want to show you what is Bollinger Bands. Bollinger Bands is like this. If you create a functions that shows you the Bollinger Bands, normally there will be a band, will be a range. One is the upper band and the other is the lower band. In that case, it helps us to determine whether the price are too high or too low on a relative basis. And in that case, if the price is close to this upper band, and that will suggest us there will be a chance that it will change the trend, and in that case, we should start selling our stock. On the other hand, if it just go to the bottoms of the lower band, in that case, is a buying chance. So the concept is simple. So it just means that normally the stock price will just tends to move to the average signal. So when the price is around this upper band, it will have a tendency to move back to the moving average or the average price. And on the other hand, if the price is at the lower band, at the lower side, it means it has the tendencies to move back to the mean of the, or to the moving average. And typically the Bollinger Bands needs two parameters. One is the periods and the other is the standard deviations. And the default values is 20 for the periods. That is the 20 periods moving average that will help us to predict the mean price or the moving average price. On the other hand, there's two standard deviations that will help us to formulate the upper band and also the lower band. And here are the equations. So let's take a look on the upper band and then also for the lower band. And we need to calculate the moving average of so-called a typical price instead of the price that I just mentioned. This is a typical price. And what is the typical price? That is the high price plus the low price plus the closing price and then divided by 3. That is the typical price. In that case, we need the typical price. And then how long about for this moving average? Just like what I mentioned, typically they will use 20 steps as the smoothing periods. So for this one, we will calculate the moving average with the typical price for 20 moving periods. And then we will pass a standard deviations for the upper bound, and then minus a standard deviations for the lower bounds. But how many of the standard deviations we can also determine, and typically is 2. So this is m is the number of standard deviations. That means it will move up 2 standard deviations, and for the lower bound it will move down for 2 standard deviations. And with that said, we can create these Bollinger Band by ourselves. And the first things that we need is to get the typical price. And just like what I mentioned, I will retrieve the high price, low price, and close price, and then divide it by 3 from the, of course, from the data frames that is input to that. And then I will just call it as the typical price. So just use create another columns. We call it TP. That is the typical price. And then we need to calculate the standard deviations. And for the standard deviations, we will use these typical price and create a roll with the rolling windows. And there's 2 things that we need to calculate for this moving average of the typical price. The first is the standard deviations, because we need the standard deviations to create the upper bound and also the lower bound. And then the second things that we need to do is the means that will allow us to judge when there's a overbought or oversold. In that case, it will normally just return to this moving average typical price. So we will call it a say standard deviations, and for this is the moving average of the typical price. And now we can create the upper bound and also the lower bound. And what I need to do is to use this mean. This is the moving average of the typical price, and then plus and minus for the number of standard deviations. So that is the number that I need, then multiplied by the standard deviations. And then finally, I can return these data frame. So this n is the stands for the smoothing periods, and this m for the stands for the number of standard deviations. And of course, we need to pass on the data frame for that particular date, and then it will return. And after the calculations, it will return me a data frame with the upper bound and also the lower bound. That is what we need from these calculations. Now, if we move back here, we can then use the compute Bollinger Bands methods functions that we just create, and we pass in the data frame, and then the smoothing periods is 20 and also 2 standard deviations. So it's more like a default. And then which will return me a data frame. And this is the method 1. The method 2 is to use the technical analysis library. That is pretty simple. That is used, just call out the TA and then use the Bollinger Bands methods. And what we need to do is to pass the data that is the closing price. They use the closing price as the typical price. They did not use these methods to calculate. But if if the price is close enough, or if the price is within a short period of times, the typical price normally will be very close to this closing price. And then the length is the smoothing windows, and then the standard deviation is std equals to 2. So very similar. It just need to pass it on for 3 parameters. But of course, the parameters are a little bit different for us. For the method 1, it will calculate the typical price, and then for the methods 2, it will just simply use the closing price as the typical price. And then of course, I can also return the Bollinger Band from these methods. And this BB is a data frame, and let me try to show you what we have in this BB. Let me just comment these methods, which is we're not going to use. We will simply use these methods. Let's see. And here we go. We have the result. It will just generate 5 columns for us. And what we need is this BBL and also BBU. And this is just the parameters, that is the length, and for this one, this is just the standard deviations. But for now, we have the lower bound and also the upper bounds. Then we can just print out the result. So the next thing that I want to do is to just combine these data frame with our existing data frame. Just combine this BB data frame that contains the Bollinger Bands with the original data frames. Just concat them and also reset the index, and then just assign it back to the original data. So just like what I say, you can either calculate, develop your own methods to calculate the Bollinger Bands, or directly use the TA technical analysis frameworks to help you to calculate the Bollinger Bands. But of course, they are a little bit different. But in my case, I just want to simplify the frames, so I will just use these TA methods. And now we have the data. What I want to do is to use the fill between functions to fill in some color inside the Bollinger Bands. At the same time, I also want to plot the upper bound and also the lower bound. And the first argument for this is the data index. And then the second argument is the upper bound. And then the third argument is the lower bound. And then now we can just simply fill up the color. This is a white color, and I want it to have some transparency, so I just set the alpha equals to 2. And finally, because we're going to show it in the legends, I also want to give a name to it. So the label is Bollinger Bands. And then I want to draw the line for the upper bound and also for the lower bound. So I just capture the upper bound and then draw the line for the lower bound. And then the color, I used a dark blue color, and then the line style, just a hyphens, and then the line width is 0.2, and similar for this one. So let's give it a try to see if we have built this successfully. Excellent! We have just built a moving edge and also the Bollinger Bands successfully, and they work perfectly. In the next lessons, what we're going to do is to build the MACD and also the RSI charts. So see you in the next video. Bye bye.